I've owned a Mini-14 for years, and let me tell you, it's not the gun people think it is. Behind the cowboy aesthetics and Woodstock charm, there's a whole side to this gun Ruger never really talks about. And once you dig into it, you start seeing the Mini in a whole different light. What's up, everyone? This is Ted from Line 45. And today, let me give you a rundown of the Mini-14, its strange history, the stuff Ruger quietly left out of the manual, and the reasons why you're missing out if you don't have one this 2025. Before I start, I would really appreciate it if you would push those buttons below, the subscribe button, the notification bell, all of them. This is not necessary, but those little clicks help a brother out. Plus, it pushes me to give you more valuable gun-related content on your screen. Now, buckle up, and let's get back to the video. The Mini-14 was never just a shrunken M14. If you grew up thinking the Mini-14 was just a baby M14, you weren't completely wrong, but that's only half the truth. I've fielded more than a few over the years, and what you start to realize is that Ruger built this thing with a very different philosophy. When Jim Sullivan, the same guy who helped design the AR-15, teamed up with Bill Ruger in the late 62nd, they weren't trying to make a military rifle. They wanted a civilian-friendly carbine that looked classic, ran reliably, and didn't scare the neighbors. By the time it hit shelves in 1973, the Mini-14 packed a short-stroke gas piston setup inspired by the M1 Garand, with a rotating bolt, self-cleaning system, and a stamped vibe that reminded people of older warhorses. What's funny is how early models, especially pre-180 serials, had all kinds of quirks. Some had thin barrels that couldn't hold zero when they got hot. The bolt hold open would lock after the last shot, but you had to reach inside and pull it down manually. It was rough around the edges, but also rugged as hell. People used it on ranches, on patrol duty, and even in prison towers. Not because it was pretty, but because it just worked. Ruger quietly made refinements over time. Heavier barrels, improved heat shields, scope mounts, and ghost ring sights. But they never marketed those changes as fixes. They let the rifle's image do the talking, and that's where a lot of folks still get it wrong. Let's keep going. The Mini-14 is mechanically interesting. Mechanically, the Mini-14 stands out because of how it blends old-school reliability with simplified modern production. It uses a short-stroke fixed piston gas system, a scaled-down version of the M1 Garand and M14 design. But what's unique is that the gas system is self-cleaning, and the op rod rides inside the stock, not above like on an AR-15. That gives it a smoother recoil impulse and keeps gas and carbon away from the receiver. Also, the bolt locks into the receiver with a Garand-style rotating action, and the recoil spring assembly is nested under the bolt carrier, not behind it. That allows the Mini-14 to maintain a traditional rifle profile, no buffer tubes sticking out the back, which is why you get that classic look with a solid wooden or synthetic stock. Ruger also went with a monolithic investment cast receiver, which helped keep costs down while maintaining strength. It's one of the only civilian carbines that feels like a blend between World War II-era battle rifle engineering and modern semi-auto simplicity. That's a big reason why it keeps ticking in the field, even if it's not winning precision awards at the range. But internals aren't the only interesting aspect of the Mini-14. Take its never-heard-before variants, for example. And the forgotten point, 222 Mini-14. If you've handled your share of Mini-14, odds are you've never seen one chambered in 222 Remington. I didn't believe it myself until I came across one at a gun show back in the early 2000s. It looked like any other pre-580 series ranch rifle, but the barrel was marked 222, and that changed everything. Ruger made this limited run specifically for export to countries where civilian ownership of military calibers like 5.56 NATO or 223 Remington was flat-out banned. We're talking parts of Europe, Latin America, and even Australia during certain import restriction periods. That version of the Mini-14 was nearly identical in function. Same action, same rotating bolt, same short-stroke gas piston, but legally different enough to get around international laws. You won't find this variant in most Ruger catalogs or official timelines. It's not something they talked about, probably because the demand was so low stateside. And to be fair, 222 Remington doesn't offer much over 223, just slightly less velocity. A tad more case neck, but it's accurate and soft shooting. The real intrigue is how few of them made it into private hands. Some import batches from Italy and the UK have turned up on forums, but the total number is anybody's guess. Ruger never released production figures, and most American shooters still don't know this version ever existed. It's not collectible in the flashy gold plate sense, but it's one of the strangest corners of the Mini-14 lineage. And speaking of rare and under the radar, let's shift gears to a variant Ruger barely even supported after they launched it. The Mini-30. Back when surplus 7.6 2x3 ammo was flooding into the States and AKs were getting imported by the crate, Ruger made a move. In 1987, they rolled out the Mini-30, which is a rifle that looked and felt like the Mini-14 but chambered for the Soviet cartridge. On paper, it made perfect sense. Match the reliability of the Mini-action with an affordable, soft-kicking 30-caliber round that could drop hogs and deer just fine. I picked one up in the early 2000s for brushwork in Oklahoma. It ran steel case ammo without complaint and handled like a proper utility rifle, especially in the thicker timber. But Ruger never really backed it up with infrastructure. For one, factory mags for the Mini-30 were scarce and overpriced compared to AR or AK mags. And aftermarket support was hit or miss. Worse, the early Mini-30 had firing pin profiles better suited for softer commercial primers. You ran steel case Wolf or Tula, and light strikes weren't uncommon, especially when the hammer spring started to wear. Ruger improved this over time, but the damage was done. The Mini-30 became a good idea rifle that Ruger never fully committed to. It's wild because the demand was there. Even today, a lot of guys would rather hunt hogs or whitetails with a 30 cal carbine than a 223. But Ruger kind of left it on the shelf. They focused on other models, and the Mini-30 quietly aged into obscurity. But you know who took the Mini-14 more seriously? Certain police departments and even foreign military outfits. The Mini-14 goes to war. People tend to think of the Mini-14 as a ranch rifle or a truck gun, and sure, it's had that reputation for decades. But let me clear something up. This carbine went places most folks don't know about. I've seen photos of Mini-14 gigabyte models riding in cruiser racks back in the 82nd, issued to rural deputies and corrections officers who didn't need a full-blown M16 but wanted more punch than a shotgun. The GB stood for government barrel and featured a threaded muzzle, bayonet lug, flash hider, and a side-mounted sling swivel. Ruger never hyped it on the civilian side, but behind the scenes, they sold thousands to law enforcement agencies in the U.S. and abroad. One of the longest-standing users of the Mini-14 is the Royal Bermuda Regiment. They issued Mini-14 GBs for over 3 decades, only recently replacing them with newer NATO-caliber rifles. There's also evidence of limited use by French prison units and even Peruvian law enforcement. Some federal agencies in the U.S., including DOE security contractors, also reportedly ran Mini-14 for site defense in the late Cold War years. Even more interesting is the AC-556, the full auto version of the Mini-14. Select fire, 3-round burst, folding stock. It was Ruger's answer to the M16, just never adopted widely. But it did get into the hands of certain SWAT teams and was issued overseas in tiny numbers. You can still find pre-1986 transferable AC-556 on the NFA market. Ruger didn't promote these contracts much. They kept the Mini-14's image clean and civilian, friendly. But the gun saw real-world uniform duty, and it performed. That's why, when it showed up in high-profile incidents later, it sparked debate that Ruger still doesn't want to revisit. The Mini-14's dark legacy. Now this is the part Ruger would rather not talk about, and honestly I get why. The Mini-14 isn't just a rifle with a long ranch record. It's also been center stage in some of the most infamous and tragic events in modern history. The 1986 FBI Miami shootout? The suspects were firing a Mini-14. Despite being outgunned and outarmored, that rifle ran flawlessly and laid down serious damage, leaving 2 agents dead and changing how law enforcement approached armed confrontations. The FBI ditched revolvers after that. It wasn't the gun's fault, but it showed the Mini wasn't just some casual plinker. Then there's the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. A legally obtained Mini-14 was used in the killing of 14 women and injuring many more. Fast forward to 2011 Norway, where Anders Breivik used a Mini-14 and a Glock 17 the Utoya Island mass murder. Most recently, in 2020, the Nova Scotia shooter used a smuggled Mini-14 as one of his primary weapons during a rampage that killed 22. These aren't easy stories to bring up, But they're part of the rifle's legacy because the Mini-14 has always walked that strange line between civilian tool and serious firepower. Ruger has never come out and addressed these directly, and they've kept the Mini's marketing focused on sport, ranch, and utility. But those headlines never went away. They live in the court documents, the after-action reports, and the hard conversations. And yet, through all that, the Mini-14 kept selling. So let me talk about the one feature Ruger almost never highlights, but finally got right after decades of user feedback. Accuracy, or rather, what they did to finally fix it. The accuracy fix Ruger quietly pulled off. If you've owned an older Mini-14 or shot one off the bench, you already know what I'm about to say. The early rifles just weren't made for accuracy. I remember my stainless ranch model from the 92nd. It looked great, ran clean, and felt balanced. But put 5 rounds downrange too fast, and your group spread like buckshot at 100 yards. Heat soaks warped the pencil-thin barrels, and that oversized gas system slapped the bolt hard enough to nudge the whole rifle around mid-cycle. You could squeeze a 3 to 4 MOA group with decent ammo, but you had to work for it. Then something happened around 2003. Ruger didn't make a big announcement, didn't slap a new and improved banner on the box. But if you were paying attention, you noticed the barrels got heavier. They shortened the gas port. They started machining the receivers with tighter tolerances. By the time the 580 series rolled out in 2007, the accuracy story had changed. I picked up a newer Mini and ran a few boxes of Federal soft points through it. The groups weren't just better, they were consistent. Under 2 MOA with factory ammo was suddenly doable, and with a good optic, it was more than just a nostalgia piece. But Ruger still doesn't talk much about that fix. It's almost like they'd rather let the old rep hang around so expectations stay low. The rifle improved, quietly, steadily, and a lot of shooters still don't realize it. Now here's the thing. Even with that fix, the Mini-14 hasn't taken over the market. In 2025, it's not competing with high-end ARs or over-the-top piston-driven rigs. So why is it still alive? Why the Mini-14 still sells in 2025? Let's be honest here. In a world where $600 AR-15 second are everywhere and even budget rifles shoot dime-sized groups, the Ruger Mini-14 shouldn't still be on the shelf. But walk into any gun store in Middle America, and it's sitting right there, probably in stainless steel with a hardwood stock, looking like it just stepped out of an 1982nd law enforcement catalog. And you know what? People still buy them. Not out of ignorance or nostalgia, but because the damn thing still has a role. For one, it doesn't look like a scary black rifle. That matters more than you'd think, especially in restrictive states or when dealing with neighbors, game wardens, or politically charged climates. The Mini-14 flies under the radar. It fits in gun racks in ranch trucks, gets handed down between generations, and still finds its way into the back seats of patrol vehicles. It eats cheap ammo, keeps running dirty, and doesn't care if it's raining, freezing, or caked in red dust. And maybe most importantly, it still feels like a rifle, not a platform. There's no temptation to bolt on a dozen accessories or rebuild it every 3 months. Ruger's never needed to rebrand the Mini-14 because it quietly serves the guys who don't care about hype. Guys like my neighbor who's had the same one since 2078. Guys who want steel and wood, not M-lock and aluminum. And for those of us who know the Mini's history, warts and all, that legacy matters. They won't put that on a box. But that's why it's still alive.